So welcome to the Coaching Focus podcast. In this session, we'll be looking at the highs and lows of a career journey and what we as coaches can do to help our clients ensure that they can manage the ups and downs and develop the skills to bounce back quicker. Joining me today is Jane Ferré. Jane's an outplacement coach supporting HR directors and senior leaders. And before setting up her coaching practice, she had 20 plus years in HR in senior roles such as HR business partner, head of leadership development, and head of talent at British Airways, before joining Leon Restaurants as their first head of training. So Jane, welcome. It's a real pleasure to have you here today as our guest. And just to give the listeners an opportunity to understand the richness of your career and I guess where the context of our conversation is coming from, I wonder whether you just outline, those 20 years and the ups and downs of your career.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me on today, Trayton, and hello to everybody who's listening. 20 years kind of goes really quickly. When you say that, I sort of start to feel like, oh my God, feel really old, and so much has happened. I think, from your introduction, the majority of that time was spent within British Airways. But when you work in a very big organization like that, it gives you the opportunity to move through lots of different departments because, you can build up your own kind of personal brands. People are much more likely to take a chance on you if they can kind of see something there that they can work with. So I think, working in a big organization is great for that. I actually started there in revenue management in the cargo division, which I didn't even know British Airways had a cargo division.
Right.
But what that taught me was all about aeroplanes, because I was literally playing Tetris with cargo. And it was actually, we were on this changing buildings. They were building this state-of-the-art facility. And we were doing one of those, like everybody has a tour around the building. I was on my tour and I was chatting with the trainers and they said, you'd make a great trainer. And I was like, oh, thanks, and they're like, we've got a vacancy and it closes tomorrow. So I went home that day and filled out my CV. And long story short, that was my first job in HR. And I've just moved through from learning to managing teams to running secondments. And the really, my kind of big break was moving into an HR business partner role. So we had a new HR director who implemented the Ulrich model of HR business partners, HR experts, shared services. And the HR business partner role really appealed to me because you're really working, not doing the stuff which I'm no good at, actually. I'm no good at the tissues and sympathy and the writing secondment letters and things like that. I'm no good at that stuff. I'm much better placed with the strategic stuff, thinking about where we're taking the business and how do we help our people to get there. That's my passion, really. And I found that in that job, I was actually, it's part of the job description, actually. You're a confidant to the senior leader. You're the safe space that they can discuss what's going on for them in their business and their team members and how everyone's getting on. And I found that I was kind of coaching, but without the badge. Necessarily. And in BA, we then moved into an internal coaching model. And that's when I thought, actually, here's an opportunity for me to get that badge and to coach officially, because I thought I'm sort of doing this by feel, by luck, by judgment, and actually getting the accreditation and that certification just really gave me, I think, the validation I sort of needed really to move that forward. And, as the airline industry sort of moved from one crisis to another, it's interesting, the topic today, the ups and downs of a career. You think about the airline industry, particularly, over the last, more than 20 years, it's been a series of more downs than ups, actually, I have to say. But it's sort of navigating through that. And I think coaching has really helped me at every single step of the way.
And I think it's an interesting point you say. So the first point I take from what you said is that being in the right place or in an organization gets you noticed and you can network and find those opportunities, one day to apply and you got the role. So that's a good positive with that. I guess the other thing that within a journey is there are elements that will impact your journey which are completely outside of your control.
Sure.
The sector issues and what I call the PESTLE: political, economic, social, legal, technical, and environmental. And got to realize, as coaches, just helping people through that transition where people are being impacted by the wider system, and that's something that we can't control.
Yeah, it's interesting and strange. I wrote a post about this just on LinkedIn today, and I talked about the change almost happens to us. So the change, so the if you think about, I use the airline industry again as an example. When it was 9/11, even way back then, we can't change what happened that day, but actually it's in terms of the impact of that on the business. We can then decide how we respond to certain changes, both for things that impact ourselves and our teams and the wider business. So I think that's certainly something that coaching has helped me with, is to figure out what are those things that there's no point in getting mad at the things that we can't change. It's about how do you respond to that change? To
control those things yourself. Yeah. So if we may, Jane, thank you for outlining that. And just for background for our listeners, I know in your bio and pre-talk before that you've been made redundant twice. So you've got experience of that, those very lows. Yeah. But I'm sure, and as we go through this, there's a lot of highs that you've also had, with BA and then obviously with Leon Restaurants. Yeah. So when you work with clients, I guess you can empathize, you can come from that perspective. Would you mind sharing with our listeners the sort of ups and downs of the normal journey that you'll see with those senior leaders with their careers? Bring that alive for me.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's almost like, I think a redundancy is an interesting place to start, because it's a rejection, actually. That's certainly how I felt. If I put kind of how I felt, it was, I'm not wanted anymore. And it's very much like being in a marriage. I describe, being in a job, in a role, and then looking for other jobs as like that you're back on the dating scene. It's like you've been rejected by your partner, the person that you thought you were going to be with
built a relationship
for a long
with,
time.
And that trust and psychological safety.
All of that disappears, and you're thinking, well, you said if I did this would happen, and I did all of that, and look where I am now, and I think that's again where sometimes you have to think about, working in HR, which is where I was working for a long time. A lot of what I was doing as HR was restructures, reorganizations that resulted in a lot of people leaving the business through redundancy, and I almost knew at the back of my mind that at some point this is going to happen to me. I almost have to be naive not to realize that. And one thing that somebody said to me, so I'm talking 15 years ago, was you have to build your network when you don't need it so that it's in place when you do. I'm going to say that again because it's so important. You have to build your network when you don't need it so that it's in place when you do. And I think this is something that people almost need to bear in mind when they're going through those highs. They almost forget about those points that you need to be helping everybody else, and you need to be building your network, and you need to be, I think Stephen Covey would describe it as, you need to be making deposits in your emotional bank account. So when you're in that position where you are able to help people, then you need to be doing that, because when it all comes crashing down, and even if you're prepared for it, it will be a surprise. That is when you need your network, and that's when you can start making withdrawals. And I think if we sort of talk about highs and lows, the redundancy, I had 2 in a year. One was kind of voluntary, the other one came completely out of the blue. Even if you're expecting them, it's still a shock when it actually happens. It's almost like that's the worst it's going to be.
Yeah. And I guess what I'm picking up here is the word rejection. And that's not a great place to be. Even if you're aware of it, or whether it is a shock, it still lingers. And can I ask a personal question? Please don't answer. Sure. And I guess I ask this because of the interest of working with clients who may be going through some form of rejection, not just being made redundant, or maybe not getting a promotion or something. What's your experience of how long that lasts for? And do you ever get rid of it, or do you still carry it?
I think it depends on, it's that how you respond to it, I think. Okay. It's really that how you respond. And this is where I think it's that difference between change, the thing that happens to us, and transition, which is moving through to the next stage. And I know that there's a great model by Bridges called the transition
William
model.
Bridges. Yeah.
And he, you can kind of move through the stages, and you will go through all of those stages. But if you can build your support network around you, you will get through those quicker. And I think this is when you can kind of start to, cash in those deposits that you've made. And just, I think for me, again, it's just knowing that it's not personal. Actually, it's business, right?
Yeah.
It's business.
And it's outside of your control. That something like the airline sector you're talking about, and like most sectors, things change, and COVID being a classic example, right?
Yeah, I mean, who knew that? Who could see that one coming? And everything that has sort of brought to us. But I also think about, the things that I used to hear from people who I have conversations with, was that as much as it's a shock, it very often is the thing that is the catalyst to change. It's almost that thing of, I knew, when I was at BA, I'd been there for just under 20 years. And I thought, I'm at that age where if I stay, I'm going to be that really negative, irritable, I was going to say a different word there, we might get taken off the air, 50-something-year-old in the corner who's going to be like, yeah, we've seen this all before, I've seen this never worked that time. And I was like, I could see myself starting to become that person. And I was like, I don't want to be that person. So it's actually time for me to go with dignity. And I talk about that quite a lot, actually. It's about go with your head held high. And the role of leaders who are managing their team through transition is to create dignity. So not all your team, if you're running a redundancy that impacts all of your team, not all of your team will want the same thing from you in terms of support.
Yeah.
So different people will need different things from you. And then you have to think as well about what about the survivors, the people who are left, because they will have survivor's guilt. Or some of them, if there's a nice package on the table, might be thinking, why wasn't it me who walked out with a big check in my pocket? So I think that's an interesting thing for leaders to think about.
So what you've done for me nicely here is start to unpick some of, I guess, the challenges, but also some of the tools that you use. So just for our listeners, William Bridges is a great tool which talks about endings, transitions, new beginnings. And you talked about those new beginnings where opportunities might start to develop. Yeah. You talked about endings and leaving an organization or a team with your head held high, that dignity, which is important. Yeah. So how are you going to close that on a positive, and then moving forward into that sort of new beginnings and those opportunities that other organizations or other roles might provide to you. So give me a flavor of how you coach some of those challenges and those emotions that appear across those sort of three phases, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes this can be me as an outplacement provider. Sometimes it can be the line manager. It really depends on the skill of the line manager.
Okay.
And also what the individual wants and needs, because sometimes people want a third party to talk to because they actually just want to vent about how pissed off they are about why it's them. And that's okay. It's like they might have that relationship with their line manager where they can have those conversations, but actually it's almost in terms of their personal brand, it's better that they don't, because that's the image that someone is left with. So, bringing in someone like myself just helps people to sort of diffuse some of that anger, that sadness, back to that rejection, and actually help them to think about, what could they do moving forward? And, a lot of time people behave that way because they're scared. Sure. They're really frightened, especially, British Airways was an organisation that had very long tenure. People were quite insular in terms of, their approach to the job seeking. It was very much within BA, and they were scared about the outside world. So it's just really getting people to almost go back to some of those basics of actually what have they got to bring to the world. So once you've kind of got over the, the anger and the venting, and I always think people are a little bit like a balloon. It's like you've got to let the air out. There's no point in trying to coach someone when they're just so angry about what's happened. And just starting to think about, what's really important to you, because this is an opportunity now. So if you start to turn this around to go, this is an opportunity, And most people would, are at that point where they're going, yeah, it's probably time for me to go anyway, or, a new
Accepting of that.
manager. Yeah, that moving
Yeah.
is that acceptance through that kind of change curve. It's like, well, we had a new CEO and he was starting to unpick everything, and it's, I was going to get found out sooner or later is what a lot of people actually say. But I work with people just to go back and figure out actually what's really important to you in terms of your own personal values. And if you could almost design an ideal job, what would that look like? What type of organization? What type of business? Do you want to be in a big global FTSE 100 company, or do you want to be in a small startup? And that's the change that I made. The things that used to kind of drive me crazy about BA was the speed or lack of, the risk aversion, which on one side is like, as a customer, I want risk aversion, but working on the inside, it used to drive me crazy. And that's one of the reasons that drove me to Leon, because it was a kind of
startup.
Just past the startup, I'd say.
Yeah.
And they wanted someone like me to help them with processes and things like that. So it's really just thinking about helping people to see what they can bring to a new role, to a new organization, how they can sell themselves in the marketplace, and just going through some of that process with them.
And I think you made it twice now. It's a really important point, which is everybody's an individual, and everybody goes through this process and needs to go through this process in the way that they want to go through it.
Yeah.
And as part of the coaching role, it's about noticing that, understanding that, empathizing with their particular context. But also, I guess, from what you're saying, you talked about values and I guess their strengths. Values about what they want and where they want to head it, and their strengths that they can leverage, and helping them be confident and realize that they have got some great skills and talents that they can use elsewhere to help them through that transition.
Yeah. So I work with a lot of HR people now, ironically. It's a bit of a full circle moment. And HR people are great, but what they're not that great at is translating what they do into business outcomes. So they talk, they can give you War and Peace on, this initiative they rolled out. And the question I get them to really focus on is the so what. So what does that mean? So what did that do?
What was
to
the value
business?
it added to the business?
Exactly. So great. You rolled out a talent program, right? So what? So what does that mean? So you implemented a D&I strategy. Okay, so what does that mean? What did that bring? How did that change? How did it make the boat go faster? To quote that book, and getting people to really think about that just helps them also to just pivot ever so slightly, because the more work they do on those sort of career stories, the picture becomes about actually what they like doing and what they're good at. So there's almost this sweet spot in between of, well, I can give an example of a project that I worked on, which I delivered, and I delivered brilliantly, but I hated every minute of being on that project, and it's like, no, I don't want to do that kind of work again. So just going through that process really helps people to think about actually where would I flourish moving forward? Yeah.
So I guess what you're saying is that it's about helping them to unpick the story that they've had.
Yeah.
And consolidating where they are with their story and where they want their story in the next chapter, if I may use that word, to move forward for their career in their career journey.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Nice. Okay, great. And Jane, I'm conscious that we've focused on redundancy and when things aren't going great and feeling rejected, all those negatives that are very human, and those are things that we do feel. But what I'm curious, and I'm sure our listeners are, is when you're working with top talent and there's an up in their career where they've been identified as promotion. So how does the coaching that you do shift with that more sort of less rejected, I guess, mindset and attitude?
So it's interesting because I have been the top talent and also been managing the top talent as well in an organization. And organizations need to get this message right. And so often they get the messaging wrong. And what people miss is so you mentioned it's like almost like that psychological contract. So if you're saying like, actually, now you are in this, the top 10% or whatever that is in your business, what does that mean in terms of what the organization is going to give me in terms of support? And actually, what's the expectation from the organization of me as someone who's top talent? And what does that mean? And I think organizations get that a little bit wrong. But think again, it's really thinking about like, where is that person? So actually thinking about, well, why are they talent? Why, in terms of, and again, this is almost like the organization needs to do a lot of work before they even get to that stage to go, what does talent mean in this organization? You know, are you talent and you forever keep that badge, or do you step in and out of the talent pool? And how do we manage that as well? Because it's that message is such a great message, and line managers like giving it, but it's like, okay, so what? And I think for me, it's the word that I always think about is the scaffolding around that individual. So if you think about, if you're going to build a new building, the first thing that goes up is the scaffolding, right? You might have some foundations first, but what's the support that you're going to put around that individual? So and again, it's about what would the individual best respond to. So is it a coach? And I always say, as a talent team, to put in a portfolio of options for the individual. So is it coaching? Is it mentoring? Is it sponsorship within the organization? And then thinking about some external support as well. So is it then to go to, I don't know, to Henley or Ashridge or Harvard and do some sort of MBA or something like that? Or is it actually managed assignments or stretch projects around the organization? But it's almost like, where's the individual right now? Where's the organization? And where do we need them to be? And that's a lot of the work that doesn't necessarily get done, and why a lot of talent programs don't necessarily hit the mark.
Yeah. So I'm sure a lot of our HR listeners will be saying, we get talent wrong. So what you're saying is they don't put the scaffolding in place. Is that the right thing to do, and understand what's relevant for that individual for where they are at that point, rather than a one size fits all? Is that what you're saying, Jane?
I think so. I had this exact conversation with somebody the other day, and the words that they use were democratize talent. And I said, actually, I think that's the wrong word for talent. I said, you democratize development for everybody in your business, but in terms of talent, it's very, very different. And it's not about it can be perceived as somebody's being treated in a different way than someone else. And it's like, that's absolutely right, in my opinion, because different people need different things. Everybody's starting from a different place. And actually, as an organization or as a talent professional, as a talent team, you should be thinking that everybody in that high potential pool has got a different path that they need to follow. So one size doesn't fit all for everybody. I think there are some activities that they can do together. And if you want to build some cohesion with that pool of talent, so a bit like graduates, when you bring graduates into an organization, they've got a great, they're all 20 something, just out of uni, first job, living away from home. They all go out drinking and bond in a different way than, somebody who's a little bit
mid-30s, 40s, 50s.
Yeah. But it is that kind of, as a group, how do you create that cohesion and support, within themselves? Because it can't be that's almost like a sign of, are you talent or not? It's like the talent should almost create their own support network for what they need.
Yeah, and I guess that talent will be competitive to try and build that connectivity and collaborative approach as a community. I think there's a word you used.
Yeah,
it's quite tricky.
I think so. I mean, I think there's almost like a level of competitiveness, because it could be that, you've got a couple of people who are on a similar trajectory, but it's not about I win, you lose. It's about, the right thing for me right now is option A, and the right thing for you right now is option B. So it might come to a point where there's a little bit of competition, and maybe some healthy competition. But if the talent team are doing a great job, they should be managing those routes, which is why it's not democratized, the talent management.
I do like the term democratized development. We use the term democratized coaching, and coaching plays a part in development. So you democratize it. Yeah, but you're right, not democratizing talent, because everybody needs that. There's a big question here, isn't there, Jamie? So my listeners, I'm sure, are saying, ask that question, Trayton. So we're using the word talent a lot. So from your perspective and from your sort of experience, what is talent?
I think it's those people who are going to move upwards in your organization quickly into bigger jobs with more responsibility. And when you look at all the data, it's the data that says those are the people that you're going to get the highest return on in terms of investment. So yeah, you should be putting more into them. And I believe in the idea that everybody is talent. Everybody has a talent, a skill. There's a reason everybody is in your business. I think maybe it's just the words that are not quite the right word. So it's like everybody that's in your business is there for a reason. You've selected them to come into your business. And if they're no longer the right people, then they shouldn't be there. And you manage that with dignity. This is back to our other point. But everybody brings something to the party. Your people who, and maybe it's high potential is the word, they bring something that's just a little bit different. And I can't remember it off the top of my head, but CIPD have got a great definition of talent, which is the one that I generally put on the table when I work with people.
Yeah. And I guess because I'm sat here as a coach thinking my view and my mindset is everybody's talented, and my role is to bring that talent out, unlock that potential. So everybody working in an organization has some form of talent. I guess what we're talking about, to be clear, is top talent or those high potentials, that percentage that going to, as you say, accelerate through the organization quickly because they're going to add the most value, whatever we call value, is to the organization. Therefore, they get the most investment, and therefore the organization gets the best return on that investment. But I will look up the CIPD quote, and if we can, we'll put it into the notes and the
show notes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
good.
I think it's that conversation as well. So the talent is not just here's the badge. It's that it's back to that conversation with, it's almost like, are you up for it?
Sure.
Because it means more. It means that we're going to give you more than we're giving the average employee. We also expect more. So are you up for it right now? And those conversations don't always happen. And I think there's also a fear if people say I'm up for it, but not right now. Could be for a number of reasons. It could be I'm just about to move house, or parents passed. I've had conversation. My parents passed away. I've just found out I'm pregnant. There's been a whole heap of things, which is I am up for it, but not right now.
Yeah,
that's great. But people shouldn't feel that if I say no right now, that door is closed forever. And again, that's something for the organisation to really think about.
I think that's a really good point, and there must be individuals. Women who are pregnant thinking, is this going to put me back 9-18 months, whatever that might be, and am I going to miss out on that next stage? So I think that's a really good challenge, and you're right, organisations, and I'm sure many do, need to consider about that. I want to come back also to a point you raised about, we're talking about top talent, but if I realise that I'm not in that top 10%, but I still want a good career, do you work with those individuals that are sort of in that, you've not really been picked up yet? And if so, what are the conversations like within the coaching sphere?
It's interesting. Those people usually come to me themselves rather than through their organisation. And I think there's almost this kind of forgotten middle. It's almost like you've got your top people at the top that you're having lots of conversations about. You've got the poorer performers who you're having lots of conversations about. And there's the people who in the middle who are steadily delivering for you, who've got a bit more gas in the tank, let's say, but are not, maybe they don't want to go at the speed, the velocity as high potential talent, but they've got more to give. So I think there's a lot of them come to me because they're at that point where it's like they feel forgotten and they feel a little bit neglected. So it's a similar conversation as a redundancy conversation, actually, which is about, well, what is it next? And sometimes the outcome, to sort of fast forward to the outcome, is that they will have the courage to have that conversation with their line manager, but maybe not just their line manager, but also back again to their network. So actually, certainly internally, the question is, what are you doing internally to build your personal brand? Some people kind of balk at that and go, oh, I'm not a marketer, but it's not about that, but it's about who knows you in the organization. So when there's conversations about, there's this project, or we're launching, in the airline, it would be, we're going to launch a new route to, somewhere fabulous that's now on the tourist trail.
Sure.
It's like, who's involved in that project? This is a great opportunity because it's something that's kind of a repeatable thing that we do over and over again. And actually, let's, test some people out in this environment. So my challenge, the people who are in the sort of middle who want to do more, is, do people know what you want to do? because sometimes you have to go and figure that out first, which
Sure.
is sometimes my conversation. And then it's about, who knows you? Have you got a sponsor in the business? So it's not necessarily about, the talent team finding a sponsor for you, but you going out and thinking about who can bring my name up when they're having conversations about the new project or the new opportunity, or whatever. Who's the person who's going to put my name on the table? Because that's how it happens. Let's get real. That is how it happens.
And I couldn't agree more, Jane. And you mentioned, the value of networking a number of times in this, and our listeners hopefully will take that away. And from my experience, when I'm working with senior individuals who have been successful, but they've got to a sort of a plateau, it's about them understanding how to manage their stakeholders better, how to build, as you say, build the brand. Get that name out in that next level, because it's an ongoing thing. Even if you're a graduate through to chief exec, you're still networking. When you get more senior, it's not just internal, it's externally as well. So there's all those areas to think about, and that's a really good point.
You need to be clear. If you want people to talk about you on your behalf, then you need to be clear about what they're saying and when they should or shouldn't put you forward for things. So it's about you might have to ask for an introduction to somebody, and again, who can introduce you to somebody? Is that something your line manager could do? Could your line manager be your sponsor? And again, this is where great career conversations come in, which is, again, everybody is talent. It's just like, what's your next step? You need to do some of the work yourself in this. So in terms of me working with individuals, they're usually coming to me because they're frustrated where they are. So it's sometimes they end up going back into their business, and then other things have happened. So I worked with one lady, and she was in that position. She was in HR, actually, and then suddenly the business acquired another business. So she'd already started to put these feelers out there. So she was the natural first choice to go and manage that integration. That was all she needed to remain engaged within the business. It wasn't about making some huge change. That was all she needed. But she figured that out herself first, and then presented that to the line manager. And then it's all, whether you believe in planets aligning and the manifestation and whatever. But, something happened with her that put her in the right place at the right time, generally engineered.
So I think the key point here for our listeners is networking and connecting. And I guess it goes back to that old adage, it's not just what you know, it's who you know as well. And I would certainly, from my experience with those that are at that high potential and have accelerated their careers, they don't just look for that network internally, it's externally as well, and even connect with a mentor, because that mentor will have connections as well, which can help leverage and accelerate and bounce back quicker. So that's great. I'd also just say for our listeners, I don't know if you read the article yourself, Jane, there's a great article by Harvard Business Review which talks about, it's not just about the A players, it also helps to understand how to leverage what they call B players, so that group in the middle. It's a great article. Again, we'll put it in the show notes so people can reference that, but that's a great article to talk about another term that's used, and I don't like it, but the pig in the middle, the bit that's in the middle of those individuals there.
It's like your middle child, they get forgotten.
I hope not.
And I'm a middle child, so I can say
are you? Okay. So you can relate to it.
That explains everything.
Listen, time's getting the better of us. It's been a fascinating conversation, and thank you, Jane. I have a final question which I ask all my guests. And our purpose at Coaching Focus is coaching for a better tomorrow. So I'd love to, from your perspective, what does coaching for a better tomorrow mean in your world, Jane?
I think for me, there's almost two parts to that. It's about the individual themselves. So what does tomorrow mean for me or for my clients? And then there's almost like a bigger, kind of more worldly view on that. So actually, if I'm a better person, then that creates a better organisation, better home, that just sort of casts waves, better community, and ultimately a better world. Yeah,
perfect. And the work we do, or you and I do, is about helping people to be better. And obviously your focus is about helping people be better and bounce back and bounce faster along their career journey. So it's been a fascinating conversation. Jane, thank you so much. And I'm sure our listeners have got a lot out of it.
Brilliant. Thanks for having me. Thanks, everyone.
You're welcome.